She sat at the head of that table, spine straight, hands folded, silent as stone. Zara Thompson, a brilliant black woman with an MBA from London, fluent in 3 languages, more educated than anyone in that room. And for 3 years, the Kang family had treated her like she was invisible, like she was dirt beneath their expensive shoes. The matriarch, Kang Myung-ja, stood slowly in her black traditional hanbok, her face twisted with disgust. She looked at everyone except Zara. She never looked at Zara, not once in 3 years. She cannot produce a Korean heir, the old woman spat, her voice dripping with venom. Biology does not lie. 14 people held their breath. Zara felt her heart hammering, but her face stayed perfectly still. 3 years of this torture. 3 years of being reduced to breeding stock. 3 years of silent, calculated cruelty from a family obsessed with racial purity. But then, Kang Ji-hoon, the tattooed Korean Mafia boss, her husband, the man who had never defended her publicly before, pulled out a white envelope. A DNA test. His grandmother's DNA test. What he revealed next destroyed everything the matriarch had built her entire life upon. And what Zara did after that changed the power dynamic in that mansion forever. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The Kang family mansion sat perched on the cliffs of Busan like a fortress built from old money and older sins. Inside, the dining room gleamed with polish and privilege. 14 people surrounded the mahogany table, their faces carefully neutral, their hands perfectly still. No one dared move when the matriarch was about to speak. Zara Thompson sat at the far end, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned, over 3 long years, that stillness was survival, that silence was armor, that showing emotion in this house was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. She was beautiful in a way that made the Kang family uncomfortable. Her skin was deep brown, rich and unblemished. Her natural hair was pulled into an elegant bun that had taken her 40 minutes to perfect that morning. Not because she cared about vanity, but because she knew they would scrutinize every detail, searching for ammunition. Her posture was impeccable, her English tailored and precise, her Korean fluent enough to understand every insult they whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. They had expected her to be different, less refined, easier to dismiss. The fact that she had an MBA from London, that she spoke 3 languages, that she could discuss international finance with more expertise than anyone at this table, seemed to offend them more than if she had been exactly what their prejudice had predicted. Kang Myung-ja rose slowly from her seat at the head of the table. At 71, she moved like a blade being drawn from its sheath, deliberate and dangerous. Her hanbok was black as ink, traditional and severe. Her silver hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin of her face. For 3 years, she had refused to look directly at Zara. Not once. Not ever. 3 years of dinners like this. 3 years of being discussed as if she were furniture. 3 years of hearing herself referred to as that woman, or the foreigner, or simply her, with such venom that the pronoun itself became a weapon. 3 years, the matriarch said in Korean, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. Her eyes swept the table, landing on everyone except Zara. 3 years I have watched my grandson waste the Kang legacy. Zara's nails pressed into her palms beneath the table. She understood every word. She had studied Korean for 8 months straight when she first married Ji-hoon, thinking that speaking their language would earn their respect. It had earned nothing. If anything, it had made things worse. They hated that she understood their insults. They hated that she had tried. Kang Ji-hoon sat beside her, motionless as stone. His neck bore the dark lines of traditional Korean tattoos, a dragon that seemed to pulse with each breath he took. His silence was more terrifying than any outburst. When Ji-hoon went quiet, people disappeared. When Ji-hoon went still, blood was about to be spilled. But he never defended her. Not in public, not in front of the family, and Zara had learned not to expect it. She may have degrees from Western universities, the matriarch continued, her voice dripping with contempt she did not bother to hide. She may have learned to speak our language with that ridiculous accent. But there are some things education cannot change. Some things no amount of pretending can fix. Zara felt the familiar burn in her chest, the tightness in her throat. She had survived boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. She had built a career on being underestimated. But this was different. This was not about her competence. This was about her existence. Biology does not lie, Myungja said. And now her voice went cold, final, absolute. She cannot produce a Korean heir. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 14 people held their breath. Zara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but her face remained perfectly still. She had learned that, too. How to feel everything and show nothing. How to be carved apart inside while appearing whole on the surface. She thought of the 2 pregnancies she had lost. The 2 times her body had failed her. The 2 times she had bled out hope in a hospital bathroom, while Ji-hoon held her hand and said nothing. The family did not know about those losses. No one knew, except him. But the matriarch somehow knew that something was wrong, that Zara's womb had not delivered what was expected, and she had weaponized that failure. 3 years of this. 3 years of being reduced to breeding stock that had failed its purpose. That was when Kang Ji-hoon moved. The dragon tattooed on Ji-hoon's neck seemed to darken as he turned his head, slow and deliberate, toward his grandmother. The movement was minimal, but everyone at the table felt it. The shift in air pressure, the change in temperature. When Kang Ji-hoon moved like that, with that particular kind of stillness, men begged for mercy before he even spoke. His hand slipped inside his suit jacket. Expensive fabric, tailored in Milan, cut to hide the gun he always carried but never needed. His reputation did the work for him. But what he pulled out was not a weapon. It was a white envelope, crisp and official-looking. "Grandmother," he said, his voice low and controlled, the kind of quiet that made people lean in even as every instinct told them to run. "I brought something for you." Myungja's eyes narrowed. She was not a woman easily intimidated, not even by her own grandson. She had built this empire alongside her husband, had made decisions that sent men to early graves, had survived in a world that did not tolerate weakness in women. She did not flinch. "If this is another one of your pathetic attempts to make me accept that it is a DNA test," Ji-hoon said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one blinked. The grandfather clock in the corner seemed to stop ticking. Zara's eyes widened slightly. She had no idea what he was talking about. A DNA test? Of whom? For what purpose? Ji-hoon placed the envelope on the table, directly in front of his grandmother. His fingers, decorated with rings that cost more than most people's houses, released the paper with a finality that felt like a gavel striking. "Yours," he continued, his voice still dangerously calm. From the hospital where you receive chemotherapy every Tuesday afternoon. The one you think no one knows about. I thought you might want to see it before you continue lecturing this family about purity of blood. The color drained from Youngja's face so quickly it looked as if someone had pulled a plug. Her hand, usually so steady, trembled as it reached for the envelope. For the first time in 3 years, Zara saw something in the old woman's eyes that looked almost like fear. "You would not dare," Myungja whispered, but her voice had lost its edge. It sounded hollow now, uncertain. "Open it," Ji-hoon said. It was not a request. It was a command, delivered with the same tone he used when ordering executions. The entire table leaned forward imperceptibly. Even the household staff standing against the walls seemed to hold their breath. Myungja's fingers fumbled with the envelope, her usual grace abandoned. She pulled out the paper, her eyes scanning the contents once, then twice, as if hoping the words would change if she read them again. Her breathing became ragged. Her lips moved silently, forming words she could not bring herself to speak aloud. "This is a lie," she finally said, but the words came out weak, desperate. "This is a fabrication. You paid someone to—" "3 independent laboratories," Ji-hoon interrupted, "including the one in Tokyo you personally recommended when we questioned cousin Minho's paternity last year. Remember that? When you demanded genetic proof before allowing him to inherit anything? Funny how standards change." One of the older advisors, a man who had served the Kang family for 40 years, found the courage to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper. "What does the test say, Matriarch?" Myungja did not answer. She sat frozen, staring at the paper as if it were a live grenade. Ji-hoon reached across the table and took the document from her trembling hands. He held it up, his voice clear and cold as he read aloud for everyone to hear. Genetic ancestry analysis for Kang Myungja. Results: 34% Korean, 29% Mongol, 18% Han Chinese, 12% Japanese, 7% mixed Southeast Asian. The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Hands flew to mouths. Eyes went wide. Someone dropped their chopsticks, and the clatter against fine china sounded like a gunshot. Ji-hoon turned slowly, making eye contact with each family member in turn. His grandmother, the woman who had spent 30 years preaching about pure Korean bloodlines, about the sacred duty to preserve their heritage, about the contamination that came from mixing with outsiders, was herself a genetic mosaic. "You," he continued, his voice rising just enough to cut through the chaos, "who have spent 3 decades lecturing everyone about pure Korean blood, about maintaining our lineage, about the sacred duty of racial preservation, are genetically less Korean than half the people sitting at this table." "Lies!" Myungja's voice cracked as she screamed, her composure shattering like glass thrown against stone. She slammed her palm against the table, making crystal glasses jump and wine slosh over expensive linen. "These are fabricated lies. You paid them to write whatever you wanted. You would destroy your own grandmother to defend that. Say it." Zara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. She had been silent for 3 years, absorbing every insult, swallowing every humiliation, keeping her dignity locked behind perfect posture and controlled breathing. But something in her had broken free. "Say the word, Hanamani. You have never had the courage to say it to my face before." For the first time in 3 years, Kang Myungja looked directly at Zara. The hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. decades of prejudice concentrated into a single burning glare. The two women stared at each other across the table, and the entire room held its breath. "You want to talk about heritage?" Zara stood slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She was tall, taller than most of the women in the room, and when she stood to her full height, she commanded space in a way that made people unconsciously step back. "You want to discuss genetic purity? Bloodlines? What makes someone worthy of carrying on a family name?" She reached into her handbag, a Hermes that Ji-hoon had bought her for their first anniversary, back when he still thought expensive gifts could compensate for his family's cruelty. She pulled out her own envelope, smaller than Ji-hoon's, but no less devastating. Ji-hoon's eyes widened. He had not known about this. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely surprised. "This," Zara said, placing the envelope on the table with a decisive snap, "is my DNA test. I had it done last month. I wanted to know exactly what I was bringing into this family, what genetic legacy I would be contributing to the precious Kang bloodline." The room was hypnotized, every eye fixed on that small white envelope as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Zara opened it herself, her hands steady where Myung-ja's had trembled. She read aloud, her voice clear and strong, each word delivered like a verdict. 23% West African, 31% British, 18% Scandinavian, 15% Iberian, 9% Indigenous American, 4% Ashkenazi Jewish. She looked up, meeting the eyes of each family member in turn. "I am literally 5 continents in one body," she continued, her voice gaining power with each sentence. "My ancestors survived the Middle Passage, chains, and the theft of everything they were. They survived colonization. They survived wars that tried to erase them. They crossed oceans, built empires, fought for freedoms that had been denied them. Every single drop of blood in my veins carries the story of survival against impossible odds." She turned to face Myung-ja directly, leaning forward over the table. "My children, when I have them, and I will have them, will carry the resilience of enslaved people who survived horrors you cannot imagine. They will carry the brilliance of merchants and scholars who built universities while your ancestors were still figuring out basic governance. They will carry the strength of warriors from 3 different continents. They will carry the adaptability of people who learned to thrive everywhere they were forced to go." Zara's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "So tell me, Harmony, what exactly does your bloodline offer? What does this precious Korean purity bring to the table? Because from where I am standing, all I see is a legacy built on lies, shame, and a desperate attempt to hide the truth of who you really are." Myung-ja looked as if she had been physically struck. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Tears, the first anyone in that room had ever seen from the Iron Matriarch, began to stream down her wrinkled face, cutting paths through expensive makeup. "I only wanted," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I only wanted to." "You wanted to erase your own shame by projecting it onto someone else," Ji-hoon finished, his voice softer now, but no less final. "You spent your entire life building a fantasy of racial purity to hide behind because you were terrified of being discovered. You constructed this entire mythology of Korean superiority to compensate for the fact that you are exactly what you claimed to despise. A mixture, a blend, impure by your own impossible standards." Myung-ja collapsed into her chair as if her bones had turned to water. The woman who had ruled this family with an iron fist for decades who had made grown men weep with a single glance, who had built an empire on fear and absolute control, crumbled before their eyes. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her breathing came in short, desperate gasps. The black hanbok that had always made her look regal now made her look like a ghost, a shadow of authority that had lost all substance. 34%, she whispered to herself, staring at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. Only 34%. The advisors around the table shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, unable to witness the destruction of a woman they had feared for so long. Others stared in fascination, watching a legend dissolve into something painfully, brutally human. Ji-hoon stood, the dragon on his neck seeming to coil tighter as he moved. He walked around the table slowly, deliberately, until he stood beside his grandmother's chair. For a moment, he simply looked down at her, this woman who had raised him, who had taught him that power was everything, that weakness was death, that purity of bloodline determined worthiness of existence. "You have 6 months," he said quietly, and there was something almost gentle in his voice now, something that sounded like grief. "The doctors gave you 6 months when they found the cancer. 6 months to decide what legacy you want to leave behind." Myungja looked up at him, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "You can spend those 6 months clinging to hatred and lies," Ji-hoon continued, "dying alone, bitter, consumed by the same prejudice that has poisoned your entire life. Or you can spend them getting to know the woman your grandson loves, the woman who has shown more strength and grace in 3 years than most people show in a lifetime. The woman who will give you great-grandchildren, whether their skin is dark or light, whether their hair is straight or curled, whether they look Korean or African or something entirely new." He extended his hand to Zara. She took it, her fingers interlacing with his. For the first time in 3 years, in front of the entire family, Ji-hoon showed affection. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "This woman," he said, his voice rising again, addressing every person in the room, "survived 2 miscarriages that would have destroyed anyone else. 2 losses that she bore in silence while you people treated her like defective livestock. She learned our language fluently in less than a year. She endured 3 years of systematic psychological torture. She sat at this table week after week, month after month, listening to herself being degraded and dehumanized. And she never once broke, never once begged, never once showed you the satisfaction of seeing her cry." The tattoos on his neck seemed darker now, the dragon appearing to breathe. "If anyone in this family disrespects her again," and his voice went cold, final, absolute, "it will be the last thing you do under the Kang name. Your businesses will disappear. Your bank accounts will evaporate. Your protection will vanish. You will learn what it means to exist without the family's shield. Am I understood?" Silence. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. Slowly at first, then with more certainty. Even the oldest advisors, men who had served since Ji-hoon's grandfather's time, bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Ji-hoon turned back to Zara. And there, in front of 14 witnesses, in front of the grandmother who had claimed she was unworthy, in front of the family that had treated her like contamination, he kissed her forehead, gently, tenderly, a gesture of love so simple and so radical that several people gasped. "Let us go home," he murmured against her skin. They walked toward the door together, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Behind them, Myungja sat alone at the head of the table, staring at the DNA test in her trembling hands. 34% Korean. A lifetime of hatred built on 34%. A legacy of cruelty constructed to hide a truth she had never wanted to face. At the doorway, Zara stopped. She turned back, and for a moment, she simply looked at the old woman. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the silent room. "If you want to meet your great-grandchildren, Harmony, you know where to find us." The door closed behind them with a soft click. Myungja was alone with her truth, with the ruins of her carefully constructed lies. With 6 months left to decide who she wanted to be before the end. The DNA test lay on the table before her, irrefutable and unforgiving. 34%. Just 34% of what she had claimed to be. And 100% of the hate that had defined her. If this story moved you, pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged not for who you are, but for what you look like? Have you ever been told you weren't good enough because of your race, your background, or something beyond your control? Have you ever discovered that the people judging you were hiding their own shame and hypocrisy? Tell us about your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about justice, truth, and dignity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.